A lot of this podcast is about filling our cups. And well, boy, do I have a new way to fill your cup, this time with plant based milk. So, Almond Cow is a product that I was introduced to recently, and I couldn't be more excited to be collaborating with them. Almond Cow makes the experience of making plant based milk at home simple and fun. There's no straining involved, and it takes less than a minute. It's an awesome little machine that, for me, helps me make milk at home budget friendly, and healthy. And as I focus more on being my best, filling my own cup, Almond Cow is one of the first things I think of each day. So, want to try it for yourself? Almond Cow is offering a special code for you that gives you $25 off your purchase of $200 or more. You can shop at almondcow.co, that's co, not com, and use code YourGoodNews at checkout. Hi, and welcome to the Your Good News podcast with me, your host, Katherine Getty. Each Thursday, I'll give you the scoop on the good news coming out of Washington and how you can get involved with this thing called democracy. Welcome back to another episode of the Your Good News podcast. The what's happening in Washington and peek behind the curtain / my version of Schoolhouse Rock are sort of intertwined. And I took a page out of my week to influence this week's episode. So yesterday, I had the chance to watch hearings happen live and in person. You may be asking yourself, what does that even mean? Well, it means I got to go to the Capitol, to House buildings, and watch a variety of hearings and hear from both members and witnesses discuss complex policy issues. I so love getting to have a front seat to history. And now with the Senate and the House being open to visitors, you can check online at house.gov or senate.gov and have an understanding of what hearings are happening each week. But don't worry, if you're not in person, you can still watch. Hearings are live cast on committee websites or on Dear C-SPAN, which has become very popular over the last month. And many are live casts on YouTube. So if you go to their website, it'll go into YouTube, or sometimes it's just on their website. But maybe I'm a nerd. I am a nerd. I have an entire podcast about civics, basically. Anyways, but if you're ever in person and Congress is in session, highly encourage you attending a hearing. It's interesting always to witness how members on different sides of the aisle handle certain issues. Maybe it's truly a bipartisan issue where both sides are really trying to find a common ground, or maybe it's something that's pretty contentious. Most of the time, though, you get to see kind, cordial members really trying to do their best to represent. It's not the screaming that we so often see on TV. So for this week's episode, I want to delve into committees, and I'll give you today a quick primer on what committees do, what's their purpose, and how do members get selected to participate on them. All right. Committees are groups of members appointed to 1, legislate, 2, debate, and 3, report on legislation. And while they're not mentioned in the Constitution, committees have become an important part of the legislative process since their introduction into the first Congress in 1789. They're created to help members organize their work, and committees were temporary in those early Congresses. It really was not something that they saw was going to happen forever. Over time, the amount of legislation considered increased, and committees became a permanent way for members to divide their work. There are 5 different types of committees: standing committees, subcommittees, select committees, joint committees, and committee of the whole. Standing committees are typically the ones you'll hear all the time. I referenced last week's Senate Judiciary. That actually was in a subcommittee hearing, to take it one further, a subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So Senate Judiciary, and then they break down on different issues into subcommittees. There are select committees. Examples of that are there's been select committees on climate. There was the Jan 6 committee. A joint committee is typically joint committee on taxation, so Senate and House members working together. So those are kind of the different types. Why are there different types? Standing committees are those committees that perennially come back up. Subcommittees typically fall under them. Select committees are typically to deal with a tough issue, and joint committees are issues that kind of are also perennial that both House and Senate members will work on. And beyond the physical type, committees in the House and Senate break down mainly on issue set. So we just talked a little bit about that. So what are some examples? Defense is your interest. Well, then maybe you'd want to watch House Armed Services or Senate Foreign Relations hold a committee hearing. Oversight is your jam. Well, maybe Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, say that 5 times fast, or House Oversight and Government Reform is more suited to you. My point in explaining these committees and what they are and why is it'll kind of drive what you want to learn a little bit more about. And these hearings are a really great way to understand how is Congress addressing insert issue. So how do folks get picked? That's always a question I hear for these committees. And like most things in Congress, parties get to pick from within their own ranks and suggest who's going to be on those committees. But members get to typically submit preferences based on maybe their districts or maybe their past experiences, maybe their career field, a doctor, maybe they want to serve on Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. We have a lawyer, well, maybe they're best on House Judiciary, a teacher, Education, and Labor. So it's kind of, they can submit based on their preferences, and then it shakes out in this process. It's not as cloak and dagger as I think sometimes it's made to be. I know there was a lot of hubbub at the beginning of the year about, Speaker McCarthy putting some members on committees. It's not typically the way people get on committees. It's typically, are you a team player? Are you helpful? Are you part of the process that get put on committee assignments that they want? Okay, so we've talked about types of committees, how to watch, be that C-SPAN or in person, how members get picked from in their own ranks based on selections. But let's boil it down. Why watch committee hearings? Well, for me, and I think I've said this a couple times already, it gives you a peek into the issues facing our country and how our elected leaders are handling them. It's the honest truth of what's happening, what issues are rising to the top, and what needs to be addressed. Sadly, the only time that I think people think about congressional hearings is when a company, maybe Southwest from the airline, they're likely going to be called up to have to answer some questions, or maybe a government agency has royally messed up and they need to come in front of. So it's more typically those, also sorry that I've said typically about 1,000 times today. They're more the oversight and flavor is what people think of congressional hearings. And there can be a broad range of investigations, oversight, hearing about legislation that members have put forward. It's super interesting. Take some time to maybe watch them. I'd be remiss if I didn't wrap up by saying these hearings are a ton of work, and the work of governing matters. And my hope is that with knowing what sorts of committees, how the process to get selected, what issues they cover, that you'll be more engaged, more excited about that next hearing, whatever it may be. And that is it. That's it for this week. That's all she wrote. Thank you so much for joining another episode of the Your Good News podcast. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit subscribe. So each Thursday, a new episode of this little Schoolhouse Rock will be in where you listen to podcasts. If you haven't engaged with me on Instagram, my handle is @Katherine Getty. And as always, tune in to next week on another episode of the Your Good News podcast.